Good morning, everyone. It's 9:30 and the inquiry is resumed. Day 2 today. We'll be carrying on where we left off yesterday, which is partway through the housing land supply roundtable session, and we're looking at individual sites. Just a couple of matters before we get into that. There are a couple of documents submitted overnight. The first was the speaking notes of the interested parties from yesterday and the attachments which we were expecting to come along with that. So hopefully you've all seen that. I'm seeing some nods, so that's good. And then the second is the draft conditions, which we discussed yesterday, so thank you for those. And I'll obviously have a look at those in advance of the conditions session. Is there any update on the other documents which are outstanding, please? Section 106 and the civil compliance statement in particular.
Good morning, sir. Yes, in relation to section 106, the latest is that there is a version in existence which is agreed between the district council and ourselves. I believe the county council is seeking some refinement. I'm told that it's expected that by mid-morning we're hoping to have a version that the county council agrees with. Fingers crossed. So that's the latest in relation to that. But whilst I've got the floor, sir, can I add, we're going to submit a short note from the drainage and highways experts in response to the material received yesterday afternoon that you referred to a moment ago. That should be on its way to the inspectorate imminently. Right. Okay. Fine.
And that's just picking up on what was said yesterday.
That's right.
All right. Thank you. Good. Okay. Any other housekeeping matters this morning then? No? Okay, could I just ask that the documents we've just discussed, and then there was also the opening statements yesterday that were submitted in writing, please could they be given inquiry document reference numbers and added to the website? I think there's a folder already on there for inquiry documents. So I think that should be 4 documents that we've got so far. Thank you. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we'll continue now then with the roundtable session. We're moving on slightly to look at category B sites as defined within the framework, and those are sites where the onus is on the council to provide the clear evidence that the sites are deliverable in the next 5 years. So we'll go back to our schedule that we were working from yesterday, and the first one on the list is 2006. So if we work in the same way as yesterday, please, I'll ask Mr. Austin-Fell to tell me his view first, and then Mr. Kay. You're muted, Mr. Austin-Fell.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. The first one to catch me out this year, but just before we go on to the outlines, I'll just preface this with a paragraph reference from my evidence, which is 6.23, and that makes reference to a Secretary of State decision from 2020, referring to the consideration of outline schemes, these category B sites. And it's just a point, sir, that I've just had regard to this consideration when going through my evidence, and in that evidence, sir, he indicates that a number of sources should be removed from the supply where there are outline planning consent, but where there's no reserve matters or evidence of a written agreement. So that's just perhaps helpful just to understand the approach I've taken. Moving then on to 2006, land at Bell Road, Botterson. This is an outline application for 50 dwellings. The council has included the entire site in the supply in years 4 and 5, 30 and 20 dwellings respectively. I have included the site for 30 dwellings in year 5, so I've pushed the trajectory back. The site has outline consent, as we know, but there is also a pending reserve matters application with the council for determination, which was received towards the end of June last year. The concern that we have, and why I haven't sort of pushed it out altogether, is that I do see a sort of intent from the developer to bring this forward, but I remain unresolved that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that this will come forward when the council suggests. And the latest evidence that's been presented from the council relates to a developer survey as part of the latest statement, the council hasn't had an updated record from the developer and instead rely on last year's evidence from April 2020. But importantly, I note that the detailed application on the reserve matters set has been submitted by Minister Property Group, an applicant I regard isn't a developer and will inevitably have to sell the site on once they get consent. So as part of my appreciation for pushing the site back a year further, I'm having regard to the fact there'll be a need for an extended marketing process to sell to an eventual end user, but with the potential prospect as well that whoever does buy it may then need to tweak and refine to meet their own requirements. So there might be subsequent revisions needed in the future.
Right, okay, thank you. Mr. Kay, then, the clear evidence why you say this scheme will come forward as you suggest, please.
Okay, good morning. First point to make is that it's common ground between us that this is a deliverable site in the 5-year period. So what we are quibbling over is the degree of delivery rather than whether it's deliverable at all. So as you've just heard, the appellant accepts that the site is deliverable within the 5-year period, but it's reduced the numbers. So it becomes a matter of judgment as to whether the full 50 for this site can come forward in the 5 years, or whether on balance the 30 of the appellant comes forward. I accept that is a judgment matter. In my view, as you can see, we've got an outline application. We've got very active reserved matters being progressed. It's a greenfield site, not particularly overly constrained in any way. It's allocated in the local plan. So it's a well-known site, not particularly controversial in any way. And therefore, I don't see, as a judgment, my professional judgment is that I can see clear evidence this site is progressing and can be delivered out in full within the 5-year period. Thank you.
Thank you. And the appellant says, the appellant says that the site owner is not a house builder. Do you agree with that?
I don't challenge that point. I'm personally, I'm not aware exactly what the what contracts may or may not be with any particular house builder. So I don't dispute it.
And do you have any up-to-date evidence that the schedule at the end of the 5-year housing land supply report, it's just been suggested there's nothing on this site in there, is that correct?
I've nothing further to add over the last couple of months in terms of progress. I'm as far as I'm aware, it's just the reserve matters are going through the system. I'm not aware of any particular problems with them, but you know, as with all applications, they have to be considered.
No, but have you had any contact from the landowner?
Apologies.
To support your proposition?
For the last developer survey we did in the autumn just gone, I believe we didn't get a response from them on this one. They're obviously active because they're going through the planning application process. But no, they didn't respond to the survey. Obviously, we can't force people to respond to these things.
Right, okay, thank you. All right, 50027 then, please.
Land at Newmarket Road, Burwell. This is an outline scheme for 350 dwellings. Since the base date of the 1st of April last year, a reserve matters application has been approved, so that was in July. And we've had cognizance of that in our appraisal. So where the council say 80 dwellings will be brought forward from this site in years 4 and 5, that's 20 units and 60 units respectively. We've honoured that assessment, but we've reduced the rate of delivery from the 2nd year. So rather than 20 and 60, we say 20 and 33. So we're not disputing the lead-in times. We're disputing the rate, and that is then back drawn to the assessment we discussed yesterday. So,
Sorry, so that's based on the build out rates, your own appraisal of build out rates in the area.
Correct, sir, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Just a further comment on that one. I know that I haven't seen any evidence, perhaps, from the council that there are potentially multiple outlets on this site. As far as we can observe, the site is being promoted by an operator called This Land Limited. So at the moment, we don't have anything in front of us to suggest there are multiple outlets, which I think further supports our assertion that one operator will be developing this, and the 33 units from year 5 is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kay?
Thank you. Again, there's actually very little between us on this one. We both agree it's a deliverable site. We're agreeing the years that completions will be taking place. We're just down to the precise numbers again, where a judgment has to be made on what is a reasonable figure to attach to that trajectory. So, as was just mentioned there by Mr. Austin-Fell, that comes back to the evidence that was discussed yesterday on what is a reasonable delivery rates for large sites. Just to highlight, it might not be quite obvious in the table you've got that it talks about 80 in the 5-year period. It is obviously a much larger size, 350 units. So there's just 80 in the 5-year period that we are suggesting will come forward. But I've nothing further to add than that. It comes down to a judgment, as I say, between the two parties. So we're both in agreement that it's deliverable. It's just a matter of what number you put in that box. And the council says we've made a reasonable estimate.
And is there any recent evidence that you've got for this site?
I'm certainly aware that it is a very active site, and we've heard from Mr. Austin-Fell that it's This Land is the current promoter, and they're certainly active with the council progressing that, and I'm aware they are active in terms of progressing it through, not necessarily through the council, but through actually delivering the site through the private means. I don't have details of that to put to you, but it's certainly not a mothballed site or anything like that. It's a very active site.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm looking for clear evidence, as you know, but I want to highlight whether there's anything in Appendix D of the 5-year housing land supply report, please. Is this site covered by that? Was there any response from the developer or the landowner?
From recollection, I don't think there was. I'm just checking now, so if you just bear with me. No, I don't think so, no.
Right, okay, thank you. 7005 then.
Thank you, sir. Land off Scotland End, Chippenham, outline scheme for 17 dwellings. 10 dwellings, sir. We have information from the council in their latest site survey. The site's currently in the process of being sold to a developer, but we have no further information about that sale, or indeed any intention of bringing forward a reserved matter scheme. We note, sir, that of the 17 conditions outlined associated with the scheme, none of them have been discharged, and we're not convinced that there is clear evidence this site will come forward. We say, sir, that it should be removed in entirety.
Thank you. Mr. Kay?
In response, obviously this has an outline. We've received the information from the owners of the site. As you can see, it is in Appendix D of the 5-year land supply report. You get a summary there of what they said in terms of it's going through legals for sale. We've taken that as the evidence that this site is deliverable. It is only 10 units. It's a very small site, so it is easily deliverable once it commences. So we think it is with that evidence from the owners that they are progressing it, that it is reasonable to deliver it within the 5-year period. But I've nothing further to update the last couple of months on that site.
So I'm just having a look at Appendix D and what is said in that table. So the landowner has responded, has said that they wanted to change table 3. It's 41 in year 3.
Sorry, no, so it's the row above. Sorry, I think you're looking at. You need to look at.
Sorry, yes.
So if I could just explain, so in line with the core document we referred to yesterday, 5.46, which was the Secretary of State decision there about where you get pro formas and information from an applicant or a developer or landowner in terms of their trajectory, that can be taken as evidence. So that's what we've taken here. We've received the reply from the landowner. They've suggested that construction will be by the end of 2023, the 10 units. They're making progress. We think it's therefore in line with the Secretary of State's interpretation of the policy, that it is a reasonable site to take forward.
Okay, so the appellant says the site is currently being sold. That is reflected in what we see there, and there are outstanding conditions. Do you have anything that you can tell me about any of that?
No, I don't dispute that there's still matters to resolve before this can actually commence on site, but I'm not suggesting this is going to be constructed in the years 1 or 2. I think it's year 3 we've got it in for from memory. But these are, this is a very small site. This is not, it doesn't require major infrastructure or anything like that to deliver. So we get in the evidence from the owner that they are progressing it, want to progress it, intend to progress it, and they've stated by the end of 2023 they will have progressed it. In my view, that's sufficient clear evidence to meet the test.
Okay, thank you. The next one then, please, 90011.
Thank you, sir. An application for 41 dwellings, site east of Clare House Stables. We note that the outline consent was approved in February 2020, and it will consequently require a reserved matters application by the 5th of February this year. Otherwise, the proposal will lapse. We haven't seen any evidence of movement on this site. We don't note that any submissions for discharging conditions have been submitted to the council, and it remains unclear when indeed this site will come forward, if at all. So from the evidence that's been presented from the council, we've concluded that there isn't anything to demonstrate a realistic prospect of development and remove the site entirely, 41 dwellings.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. At the point of the base date of the 5-year land supply back in April, we clearly had an outline in place. Still nearly a year for reserved matters to be submitted. We obviously asked the landowners to confirm their position. We've got a response, so that's in Appendix D of the 5-year land supply report. It was brief, their response, but they did respond and they did confirm that they'd like to change some of the figures in the trajectory. So they were showing intent. I accept that things are ticking on and that we are only a month now for those reserve matters to be submitted. They still could do. It's quite often the case we get from applicants a reserve matter submitted, literally a day or two before the reserve matter deadline is up. So it is still certainly possible to do that. I accept, though, from February, March onwards, this is one of the sites at risk. So come April, when I do my updated tables, this site may well be one that drops off. But as it stands at the base date and as confirmed by the developer survey, this is still a deliverable site. And it is on that basis that we believe there is sufficient evidence, there's clear evidence that it is a deliverable site with realistic prospect of delivery. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. One 00029 then, please.
Thank you. So this is land at High Flyer Farm, Ely. This, if you recall yesterday, so I made reference to sites which I considered would be best considered sort of in aggregate, because they sort of represent developments that sort of sit together as part of a wider market area. This is the second of those three sites that I referred to, so I'd just like to draw your attention to that in terms of what is realistic to be expected to come from them, and how all the sites would interrelate to each other. In this particular instance...
Can you remind me, Mr. Austenfellow, the reference of the other site that you're referring to?
Also, yes, it's 10030. This application, sir, is as part of a wider urban extension, and we note that the site benefits from an outline application for 800 dwellings. This is from a 2011 application. This has been something rumbling on for some time now. The council is already including the first phase of development within this proposal. That is part of the detail we've discussed. This relates to the next phase, shall we say, of that scheme. And the council have included 100 units, which they anticipate will come forward in years 4 or 5. We haven't seen any evidence from the council to demonstrate that these rates of delivery will be supported, and consequently, we've taken the 100 units out of the supply altogether.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. So yes, as Mr. Austenfellow just said, this is phase, in simple terms, this is phase 2 of a much bigger site of 800 units. So the first point to make is that the appellant position, as I see it or understand it, is that the appellant accepts that phase 1, which is not this site, this is the separate site, is being delivered and will be built out midway in year 3 of the 5-year period. That's what our trajectory says, and the appellant doesn't challenge that. It accepts that point. So it accepts that phase 1 will be done and dusted midway in year 3. But what then the appellant seems to be suggesting is that for phase 2 coming on stream next, there'll be a 2.5-year gap or perhaps more before this phase 2 will actually start delivering. I don't think that's reasonable position to take. A developer doesn't tend to finish some homes and then shut up shop for 2 or 3 years, or perhaps just does a little bit of groundwork. It wants to keep momentum going. So that's the basis on how we've set the trajectory, that phase 1 will get built out, and we accept phase 2 won't deliver in that period. But what we are putting forward is that once phase 1 is built out to the timetable which is agreed by the appellant, that phase 2 will then come on stream straight away. That's just a natural phasing and continuity of the much bigger site. We don't think it's reasonable to suggest that each phase will have this significant gap between them, several years gap between them, before each phase starts to deliver. We don't think that's reasonable. So the clear evidence from our perspective is phase 1 is cracking on. The appellant agrees with phase 1, agrees when it ought to be delivered. So in effect, the wider outline is already under construction because phase 1 is well underway. We're simply moving to phase 2, and I think that is very clear evidence in my mind that this should be allowed within the 5-year period, and for 100 units. We're not overdoing it in terms of the quantum that's going to be delivered in the 5-year period. So that's my position. Thank you.
Okay, and any response to the survey from the landowner on this one?
Just bear with me. Yeah, so this is the very last, oh no, sorry, it's the last, sorry, so if you go to Appendix D, yeah, it's the 3rd page of Appendix D. Apologies, there are no page numbers there.
Can you see the PDF pages on your screen? Is it 81 and 84?
Sorry, 81 of the PDF pages. There's just a single row, which is this site.
Yes, I see it.
So actually, on this one, the developer survey that we got this year confirmed the delivery rate of 50. They actually indicated that it should be from year 1 to be delivered. We've taken a far more cautious approach than that and started in year 4, because as I just mentioned, we think this will come forward as part of a natural phasing. So it won't actually start delivering completions until phase 1's completed. The applicant in this place is obviously far more ambitious than the council is.
Right, okay, thank you.
Can I just provide one final comment on that, if I may?
Yes.
First of all, I would say I'm encouraged that the council has decided not to take the developers' comments there at face value quite clearly. They have applied some form of reasonable judgment there, but I still say that judgment is not informed by any regard to clear evidence. We've already discussed 1 or 2 sites where outline consent has been granted, but there are reserved matters pending. And on those sites, using some of the council's trajectories, we're looking at delivery in years 4 and 5. So in a similar time scale to the rates that they're proposing here. But that is where we've got evidence of a reserved matters that has been submitted. We're not in the benefit to say that is the case here. So
I think if I may, sir, just follow up on that one. This is different. This is not a standalone site, you know, that on the edge of a village or something like that that has to go through the process. This is a much bigger site, already got outline. That outline is under construction in effect, with phase 1 well underway. So that's the big difference in this one.
Yes, okay, thank you. Right, 10030 then.
just for your notes, so this is the 3rd site in the trio of applications currently in the North Cambridgeshire wider urban extension area, just for your reference. This is an outline scheme for 1,200 units, consented outline in June 2016. I note that there have been subsequent reserve matters applications approved on these sites, which we've accounted for in our trajectory, where the council say 50 dwellings per annum in years 3, 4 and 5. We say 37 dwellings per annum, consistent with rates observed in the past on years 3, 4 and 5. So again, it's one of those where we're not disputing the site is undeliverable we're saying that the rates are too optimistic for those 3 years. So we make a reduction accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kay.
Yes, this is another one where there's quite a bit of common ground. We're both accepting it's a deliverable site, so it can be included within the 5-year period. It's just a matter of trajectory. We discussed that evidence yesterday. I don't think we need to rehearse that again. We think the figures we've put forward are reasonable and realistic.
Any response to the survey on this one?
I don't believe there was on this one. I'll just check for you. Sorry, yes, there was actually, wasn't there? This is the page 82 of the PDF. So they supplied a trajectory for us on this one that we've incorporated into it.
Right, I'm not seeing that. Page 82, did you say? Yes, is this the 1601,794 entry?
Yes.
Yes.
So.
So the council has just accepted the trajectory put forward there, then, have they? It doesn't really tell me much in that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right, okay, thank you. Double 10024 then.
Thank you. So Scottsdale Garden Centre. This is a scheme which has an outline approval, but it's been partially developed already. As part of the evidence, we also regard that there is a outline. Sorry, there's a detailed application with the council that was submitted post base date. We're still taking regard to it. That was submitted on the 4th of August. Phase 1A for 16 dwellings. There's, as I can see, there's no further evidence of delivery on this site to support the council's suggestion that 53 units will come forward. That's 35 in year 4, 18 in year 5. We're not disputing that the site is undeliverable. We're disputing the rates of delivery expected from that site. What we've done is we've pushed the trajectory back to reflect the need to actually discharge that reserve matters application, but also sort of cognizant of the fact that there is no further evidence of a wider capacity from the site at present. So we're using the figures of 35 dwellings in year 5.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. This is similar to the the discussion we had a little early on Ely North, has just been mentioned. This is the garden centre site in Fordham. There's been a number of applications on that site that have been built out or virtually built out. So this is the final phase of that, if you like. So it's not a completely standalone site in its own right. It obviously connects to the wider site that's been successfully constructed over the last 3 or 4 years, I think. Now it probably commenced. So we've got agreement. There's common ground between us that the site's deliverable, so that it qualifies within the 5-year land supply. Where we, as with some of the other ones, it's just a matter of the numbers you apply in what year. We say that as there has been very successful delivery on that site, a good speed actually for the wider site, that it's not unreasonable for this site to progress in the 5-year period. And that the applicant is pushing it out to year 5 to commence completions is not a realistic position to take in our view.
Have we got some details of the past levels of delivery on this site?
I don't think we have in the evidence submitted, so I'm not aware of.
What makes you say that there's been a good rate of delivery previously?
Just from personal knowledge of the site, I drive past the site quite regularly, and the homes were delivered very quickly. The first phase of the homes were delivered very quickly, but I don't have the actual raw data to present to you. But as it says in my proof, that 2/3 of the site has full permission and is nearing completion. So we basically is the final third of the site.
Okay, and any response to the survey for this one?
Not to this final phase, no, there wasn't. I think we did have good engagement with them when it was the earlier phases, getting the trajectories agreed. But for this final phase, the developers simply cracking on.
Okay, 1-1. Oh, Mr. Austin Fell, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, sir. Just to add on to that one, the commentary of the site supplied in the 5-year housing land supply statement makes reference to the trajectory effectively, which was set out as part of the local plan examination back in September 2018. So it's quite clear we haven't really had much developer engagement on this, other than, as Mr. Kay has mentioned, them doing their own thing and cracking on. Simply put, we feel that we're being sort of quite generous with this one, really, because we can only really see the evidence for that phase 1A in with the council at the moment. So that's still pending, and that is evidence for 16 dwellings. So by moving things to year 5, including 35, we're making a reduction, but we're still providing over and above what we can see as evidence of intention to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I may just respond to that. I mean, in our view, the clear evidence is that this is a single site of which 2/3 is virtually completed. This is the final third of a site. So I just want to emphasize, this is not a standalone site, which can have more uncertainties of precisely when it will be delivered. This is a construction happening on the ground on that wider site now, and has been for a number of years, and is delivering out. That's the clear evidence from our view.
Okay, thank you. 110025 then.
Yes, it's land adjacent to 67 Middlehall Road. included in the supply for 70 dwellings. The council indicate 35 dwellings in 4, 35 in 5, and then the balance beyond the 5-year period in year 6. Now, this has outlined consent, sir, and we note that there was a detailed application submitted in July 2021. That remains to be determined, however, and we observe that there are a number of outstanding matters to respond to, notably objections from the local lead flooding authority in a response dated 14th of September, and highways matters also to contend with. Now, what we also note as well, sir, is that this site seems to be promoted by a promoter called Ashton's Legal. So in addition to issues with the reserve matters application, we're not entirely clear who's going to be delivering this site. We don't observe that there's any recent statements from that promoter to give us any comfort that this will be resolved and subsequently sold on. Now, what you might say, I guess, is we have an intention of development here. We have a reserve matters application in, but as we'll perhaps come on to on another site, that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a guarantee of delivery from a site where it has outlined consent. We see at present no clear route for this application to be determined. We see no clear evidence of a developer that has been brought on board to deliver the site, and consequently we're proposing to remove all 70 units for entirety from the supply.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. Just picking up on some of the language there, we heard the phrase, there's no guarantee of delivery. That's not quite the test we obviously have to apply, but I do accept that there needs to be the clear evidence. In this particular case, we have an outline, we have reserved matters submitted, it's showing intent, and on that basis, we believe it was reasonable at the base date to continue to have this site in the 5-year land supply.
Okay, any response from the landowner on this one?
No, I don't think there was, sir.
If I may say, sir, the comments referred to in the council's November statement indicate that the delivery rate is based on the promoter's response to the site monitoring survey in 2018-19. That's helpful.
Thank you.
I mean, just to follow up that comment, if I may, sir, I accept that if on that alone, if the reserve matters hadn't been submitted, we certainly wouldn't have relied on that survey of 2018 alone. We would have deleted this site from the 5-year period. It's on the basis that there are reserve matters pending that shows the intent. That's the basis on which we have included the site.
Yes, okay. Right, 120050.
So 64 Station Road, Haddenham. This site has outline consent granted in December 2020. The council anticipates that all 40 dwellings approved will be considered in the 5-year period. So that's years 3 and 4, the rate of 20 dwellings per annum. I note that there is a reserve matters application with the council. This was received just after the base date on the 20th of April, but regardless, we're having regard to it. I also note that there was an extension agreed with the applicant there to extend the deadline for determination of the 24th of December last year. Perhaps the council can update me as to whether or not that continues to be the case, but from what I've observed, particularly on a number of sites, it's not unusual. There are a number of schemes at the moment that have been with the council a number of months. 9 to 12 months and more is not an unusual feature, and I expect perhaps that is in part down to the strain placed on local authority resource at the moment. But that putting that aside, sir, I don't regard there to be any showstoppers for this development to come forward, and that's reflected in my delivery rate of 20 dwellings per annum from year 5. But again, I just note that there will be a necessary lead-in time to account for here that perhaps has not been accurately captured by the council. So we still have the application to determine before you can go through the process of discharging conditions to then get a spade in the ground. But before that occurs as well, I note that the site will need to be marketed and sold to someone who will actually be delivering the site. The applicant, Kaplan Property Group, are not a developer, so they will need to go through that process. So there's that additional period which will be added to the lead-in time before we can actually start to see houses come up the ground on this. So rather than 20 in 3 and 4, as the council say, we say 20 in year 5.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. Like some of the others, there's common ground. This site is a deliverable site. It's a matter of the numbers again, in what year and how and what the quantity is. We acknowledge there is still some progress still to be made on the site before construction can actually commence. That's partly reflected in the low trajectory we added, and we haven't commenced it until year 4. The appellant says that nothing will happen until year 5. So that's just a judgment matter between us. I do wonder why, in this case, the appellant suggests that only 20 can be delivered even in year 5, when elsewhere they're suggesting that 33, 37, their evidence says 33 in there. The proof is a reasonable number to suggest is something that can be delivered on site. But in our view, this is just a matter of judgment between us. What is an acceptable figure, appropriate figure? We contend that the 2020 in years 4 and years 5 is a reasonable one to put forward. Thank you.
Any evidence to support that other than your judgment?
No, that's a judgment, yeah.
Is there any response?
Sorry, a judgment in terms of the quantum of figures, yes. I mean, obviously, as I say, it's common ground that it's a deliverable site. It's just a judgment. Both parties are making a judgment on what it believes is what quantity should be delivered in what year.
Yes, any response in the survey for this one?
Not on this one, no.
I have autumn 2020 in the council's statement, if that's helpful.
There wasn't in 2020, did you say?
Sorry, not in this year's statement, but the year the supply statement year previous.
Thank you. And Mr. Austenfeld, it was just said there you used a rate of 20 as opposed to the average figure that you'd used elsewhere. Well, can you tell me why that was?
It's a small development, 40 dwellings. Again, we don't know yet who's going to buy the scheme, so it's hard to sort of say what sort of the developer's intentions might be. Whether they're a sort of bespoke developer who has aspirations for units that might want to be brought forward at a lower rate, or whether or not they'll be brought forward at a higher rate. The 20 dwellings per annum seems reasonable on this instance. and reflects the fact that on larger schemes as well, you'd likely have a sort of lead-in time. So if this were a larger scheme, we might apply a lower rate to start with, followed up to the 33 dwellings per annum. I think it's not unreasonable to suggest 20 per annum on this one. But again, so we simply do not know what will come forward, because we haven't yet got a developer operator on board.
Okay, thank you. Uh, 130017.
Thank you, sir. A small part of a larger site, outline consent for 125 dwellings, which includes the provision of 4 self-build units. That is the only element under contest here, sir. We're suggesting simply that there hasn't been any evidence of detailed applications that are going to come in on these self-build units. I don't think that's unreasonable, sir. On the other site where self-build was involved, that is site reference 250050. We contested that site for 5 dwellings. The council subsequently provided us with details of further applications, and we've accepted that. On this site, I haven't seen any evidence of the detailed application coming through. Therefore, we remove those 4 units.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
So, as you've just heard, this is a large-ish site, over 100 units, which is being built out. The appellant doesn't challenge that. Part of the permission, as is commonplace with self-build, following the policy in our local plan, whereby 5% should be if for sites over 100, 5% should be self-build. That was applied to this particular application. So we have these 4 units of self-build. By their nature, they don't get the full permission, because self-build is for the owner to design that property themselves. So they don't. It's often a hybrid application where the self-build is remains as as the outline. What has to be done, though, for the self-build plots, as the developer builds out the wider site, those plots have to be serviced so that the individual self-builder is not constrained in terms of delivering that particular plot, other than through the normal planning application of getting that design approved. So in our view, the appellant isn't contesting the wider site. The appellant isn't contesting that the 4 plots will be serviced. It's just contesting that it doesn't believe that there is the evidence that these 4 units will come forward. I dispute that. These are now very deliverable plots, because they are serviced as part of a wider site. We've even got evidence from the appellants elsewhere on self-build and the demand and as it puts it, for self-build units. So even under their own evidence, they're suggesting there is that wider need for self-build, and we see these 4 units as part of that wider site, clearly deliverable within the 5-year period.
Right, okay, and any evidence that they are will come forward within 5 years, the detailed permission applications or anything like that?
As is the nature of these, self-build plots are individual plots of one dwelling. So we're not likely to get an individual coming to us now saying, well, we're interested in building this site in 3, 4, 5 years time. These are very quick process. So they're marketed by the applicant, sold on the open market, and can be quickly turned around. We wouldn't we certainly wouldn't do a developer survey for each individual plot. That's just not a realistic process. In this case, this is part of a much wider site of which the appellant isn't challenging. It's 4 units remaining. We see it as part of the package of that wider site that is entirely deliverable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, 14004 then, please.
Thank you. Land southwest of 98 to 138 Station Road. Also, perhaps we might want to refer to as sort of the Kennet Garden Village extension. An outline proposal for up to 500 dwellings. Now, this is something that the council have proposed in collaboration with a business sort of set up through the Kennet Community Land Trust. This is quite a significant proposal, and the council have given quite considerable flexibility to the land trust here in ensuring that this can come forward. That's evidence when you look at the decision notice, whereby we have an unusually long 10-year period in which to submit a reserved matters application, and a high number, 46 conditions to discharge before we can see a scheme brought forward on here. Notably, there'll be a need for significant infrastructure works to take place, and there will be need, quite clearly, to secure a delivery partner to ensure funding mechanisms. So at present, sir, there has been no further progress since that outline was consented back in April 2020. There's no evidence of a reserved matters application. There's no evidence of a delivery partner to bring this one forward. As I mentioned, sir, it's not a scheme that is likely to be delivered quickly. It's an urban extension, so by definition, it will need a lot of front loading. And simply put, sir, we've seen no evidence from the council to suggest it should come forward, and subsequently we remove it from the supply. I would note that there was the intention, or there was the reference that has been made by the Land Trust that they would like to see commencement on this site by 2021. So that aspiration clearly has fallen by the wayside.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
Yes, thank you. Apologies if I may just go back to the last site. I forgot to reference that it is actually wrongly allocated as a category B site. It is actually a category A site in the MPPF definition, because it is a 4 units that is minor. That would be my understanding, but I will leave that with you.
Well, let's just deal with it's part of a larger permission, is it not?
It is, but the 4 units being quibbled, I would argue that it would fall under the MPPF definition A, because there's 4 left are not major development.
Do you want to break all the other schemes down into into smaller units as well? But I mean, okay, Mr. Austin-Fell, do you want to say anything about
that? I see it as it's been originally submitted. This is, quite clearly a significant, large application. I think the council was right to place it where they were originally. But if the council wants any further submissions on that, I'll put a response in.
I only reference it because the applicant has broken it down into 2 chunks. The wider site it's saying is deliverable, and these 4 units it's saying it's not. I'm happy to leave it, sir. In terms of the Kennet site, then, if I may, we've just heard from Mr. Austin-Fell there that he's got no evidence of further progress. This was one of the sites, and there were several actually, but this is one in particular where we didn't, prior to proofs, we didn't know what the position of the appellant was. We've obviously got the proof challenging this site and the delivery rates. This is one of the sites where I engaged with Mr. Austin Fell up until the last couple of days before the inquiry started. And I did provide evidence to him to demonstrate that the site has been sold to Bellway Homes. So it is now Bellway Homes progressing the site. So Mr. Austin Fell knows this. And in terms of, because we were now aware that the appellant was challenging this site, I contacted Bellway Homes with an update. I appreciate this hasn't been submitted to you, but Mr. Austin Fell has this evidence. There are,
Mr. Kay. This is the reason why I asked for a position statement in advance of the inquiry, and the fact that we've got all of these entries that just says that the appellant's position is unknown is not very helpful.
So if I may explain, that column, if you see the top of the column, that's simply cut and paste from the proof. That's what the appellant did in preparing this table. It's simply cut and paste. What I attempted to do with the additional column, the additional comments column, was to reach agreement with the appellant on site, on commentary. That was unable to be achieved. This was part of that discussion. The appellant wasn't accepting that we could reach agreement on all of this, so therefore that had to be all deleted. This is just symptomatic of the very late evidence that, in our view, that we've received from the appellant in trying to negotiate common ground on some of these sites.
Well, the evidence was submitted in line with the timetable that I set, wasn't it? But we are where we are, but this is why we have such a laborious task now of going through each of these sites, because
I agree. This should have been, in my view, this should have been sorted well before proofs were submitted. But in terms of this evidence, the Bellway Homes are suggesting that the reserve matter submission will be in next month, February. They are suggesting a start on site in July, with first occupations from July 2023, with a build-out rate of 72 per year commencing 23-24. Now, I'm not suggesting you take those figures as an amendment to our 5-year land supply figures that we've set out, where we're suggesting 130. If you took Bellway's figures, it's well over 200 in the 5-year period. But what it does demonstrate is there is clear progress and intent on this site to deliver it, and therefore the 130 we have suggested may be conservative, but I'm happy to stay with it. The appellant is suggesting...
None of this is in evidence, is it?
This hasn't been submitted yet, no. Other than the appellant is aware of it as well.
Okay, anything further on that site?
Not from myself.
Okay,
sorry, that's fine.
180016, please.
Thank you. Land south of Chamberlain Fields, outline application for 126 dwellings. And note that there is a further reserve matters application which has been submitted to the council in April 2021, yet to be determined. Again, we're seeing a bit of a lengthy process here in terms of the ability to actually bring these submissions to conclusion. I don't dispute that this site should be taken out altogether. The council say 50 dwellings in year 5. We say 33 dwellings in year 5. So this is a build out rates contention rather than leading time set.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
Yes, again, this is one of those sites where there's limited difference between the parties. So we're both agreeing the site's deliverable. It's a matter of units to allocate to the particular trajectory.
Why do you give the trajectory that you give?
So the appellants applied the average that we discussed yesterday of 33. We discussed yesterday that we believe for the large sites, it's not unreasonable to have a figure of 50. I've nothing further to add than we had on that discussion yesterday. So this site we believe falls into that category where 50 is a reasonable number to put forward on larger sites.
Okay, 180030.
Land parcel north of Grange Lane, Littleport. So we have an outline consent here back from January 2020 for 680 dwellings. Includes retirement shelter, neighbourhood centre, so it's significant development. We note that there is a further reserved matters application that's been submitted post-base date on the 16th of April 2021. So it's whilst we know that remains still to be determined, we consider that this can come forward within the 5-year period, and we've set out rates of the contrast slightly to the council. The council have included rates of 35 dwellings in year 4 and 70 in year 5. We say, sir, that those rates should instead be 33 dwellings per annum, consistent with the evidence that we provided following those years 4 and 5. So a slight reduction in difference.
So you've pushed the trajectory back a year, have you?
Thank you for pulling me up on that one, sir. No, I think there's a slight sort of error in the text you've been provided, but we have just we have used years 4 and 5 in our trajectory, so we have followed the intended lead-in times for this.
It's just the build-out rate that's changed.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
Again, this is another one of those where there's common ground on the site being deliverable, and it's the rate you have applied to the site. So the appellant has applied that average of 33 that we discussed yesterday. The council has applied a slightly higher rate. A matter of judgment based on the evidence we discussed yesterday. I have nothing further to add on that one. Other than that, there's common ground between us. Perhaps if I was only to point out one relevant matter, if a build out of 33 did apply to this site and applied for every single year that this site was delivered for 680 units, that implies a 20-year build out for this site. In my view, that's not reasonable position to take or realistic. We think a site of 680 units can be built out in less than 20 years.
And any response to the survey on this one?
I don't think so, no, sir.
Okay, 26009.
Land rear of Garden Close, Sutton. This is a proposal adopted in the Sutton Neighbourhood Plan. Outline consent for 53 dwellings secured in January 2018. The council is assuming delivery in years 3 and 4, using the support of a reserve matters application which was submitted in September 2020. Now, that reserve matters application was actually refused by the council on the 19th of June 2020. A second reserve matters application was refused again on January 2021. Now that second refusal, sir, was appealed, and at the time of exchange, that was still a live appeal. But I do note, sir, and apologies, this isn't an entry into the inquiry library yet, but I do note that that was actually dismissed on the 23rd of December last year. Now, notwithstanding the decision notice coming through, we say that the site should be removed wholly from the supply because there's considerable uncertainty that it would be delivered. It's still the status of an outstanding appeal at the time. And I think that sort of demonstrates, I think, on a number of these sites that the presence of a reserve matters application pending does not always constitute that sort of realistic prospect of delivery. I think the decision notice that we now see on this site perhaps helps put a bit the nails in the coffin on this site, if I may say, just to sort of demonstrate that whatever scheme was before the council that could be relied on no longer can be the case.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. Yeah, in interest of transparency, I notified Mr. Austin-Fell a few days ago that appeal had been dismissed. So he's correct on that information. What I haven't notified him of, because it only happened subsequent to that, so this is literally in the last few days, is that it's a slightly complicated site in that a second outline has now been approved on that site. The section 106 was signed literally I think it was Friday or Monday this week. So what you have now is, yes, that first reserve matters has been dismissed, so that at appeal, what you're back to is a outline permission with a 3-year period for reserve matters to be submitted. Now, I accept, notwithstanding what I've just mentioned, that the kind of this is one of those sites that's kind of taking 2 steps back and 1 step forward kind of approach. It is becoming a more, I accept, a less strong case that this site can be included in the 5-year period, simply because, particularly since that appeal decision was reached a couple of weeks ago. So I accept it's now the clear evidence is not strong on this one. I accept that on that basis. Notwithstanding the outline and the section 106 has now been signed, so it becomes a live site again. So the site doesn't disappear completely, but I accept there is uncertainty moving forward within the 5-year period on this particular one.
So should it be removed from the supply on that basis, Mr. Kay?
I think if I was writing the 5-year land supply report today with the knowledge that the appeal had just been dismissed, then on the balance, yes, I would probably remove that site.
Okay, so that should be removed from the supply for the purposes of this appeal.
I would be content, yes, that this could be removed from it. what I would like to see is further evidence that the outline that's now just been signed is actually going to be progressed in the 5-year period. And clearly I don't have that today. I may have it in a few months, but I don't have it today.
Thank you. All right, so let's move on then to 34001.
Land north of 22 Morroway Lane, Whitchford. So there's an outline consent sir on this site dating back from March 2019. I do note that subsequently on the 19th of August last year, there was a reserve matters application that has been invalidated. And I expect that it is this this evidence that the council relies upon to include the 40 dwellings in its entirety in year 5 of the trajectory. Now, what I note here, sir, is that this site is somewhat linked to an adjacent site in that it requires an upgrade to the access and can only come forward before the adjacent scheme can be delivered. And what the council is saying here is that one will follow the next, and that when you get to the end of one scheme, the other can come forward as part of the natural progression. What we're relying on here is a perfect sort of rate of delivery and everything to marry up for that to happen. At present, we still have a reserve matters that is pending determination, so that yet has not gained consent. But I don't consider that the scheme as submitted to the council can currently be relied upon, and it's not something that should be included until further certainty of that process is concluded. What I say instead is that it's more realistic to expect about 20 dwellings per annum from this site, but so that would be from year 6 onwards as a more realistic estimate. So as a consequence, that would be removed from the supply. The 20 dwellings per annum is clearly less than the 33 I rely on for some of the larger sites, but perhaps more consistent with one of the sites we discussed earlier for a similar quantum.
Okay, so let me just be clear. You said that this scheme coming forward is reliant upon infrastructure from another scheme. Is that one of the schemes in this schedule or not?
I might have to defer to Mr. Kay on that one, if you don't mind.
It's not a challenge. It's not a disputed site. So it's in the 5-year land supply report, but it's not one that's been disputed.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Kay, what do you want to say about that site, please?
So yeah, Mr. Austin-Fell's given a helpful summary there of the situation. So you've got these 2 sites, of which the site being contested here relies upon the access from the first site. So we're in agreement with that one. And actually, Mr. Austin-Fell himself has just agreed that the site is deliverable, but has simply pushed it to outside of the 5-year period to year 6. What Mr. Austin-Fell doesn't do is challenge the site under construction now with a build out rate of year 3. So he quote a rate which I have not challenged. So he accepts that the first site not only is not challenged, but actually the delivery rate is agreed and will be built out by year 3. What he's then suggesting to you is that the next phase, if you like, the next site along, there'll be a 3-year gap, at least 3 years gap before that site will start delivering. I don't think that's a reasonable position to take. There's clear evidence of site 1 being delivered. It's agreed between the parties it will be delivered by year 3. Natural progression, to use a phrase that Mr. Austin-Fell just used, onto the next site will take place much quicker than a 3-year gap, in my view. That's my professional judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, okay, so we're moving on now to allocations in the local plan, which have been phrased Cat E sites, but still within category B, I think, of the framework. Is that right? Both agreed with that? Yes. Okay, 60011.
Thank you, sir. Let's start with a large site for 2 dwellings here. Land to the rear of Star and Garton Lane, allocated in the 2015 local plan. 2 dwellings forecast in year 4 of the trajectory. So the council might want to argue here that, you know, it's only a small site, of course it'll come forward. Fact remains, since the plan was adopted, we haven't seen any evidence of a submission from the applicant to give us confidence that this site will come forward. No clear evidence of delivery, sir.
Mr. Kane?
Yes, as just described, it is an allocated site, allocated a very small site, so it is readily deliverable in terms of there are no particular constraints to overcome on the site. Is there the clear evidence test? I accept this is one of those where you could argue either way. There hasn't been any progress. There hasn't been any progress in the last few months as well. If I'm frank, I would be willing to accept that this site hasn't got that clear progress, and there hasn't been any clear progress in the last few months. So I'd be willing to concede this one.
Okay, thank you. As I've said, I'm going to ask the parties to update their position. So if you are taking a note of the changes that need to be made to calculations, that can be reflected, please. Okay, 110020.
Thank you. Site south of Milden Hall Road in the Fordham neighbourhood plan. This is included for an allocation, included for 15 dwellings in the council supply, perhaps reinforced by a planning application which was submitted on the 22nd of October, albeit this was for 16 dwellings, not the 15 included in the council's figures. We note that this remains a live outline application, yet to be determined. So it's been with the council now well over a year. And there seems to be a number of requirements or changes that need to be made here, sir. So there's a number of documents which are, or were at the time of exchange of evidence, still subject to extended consultation, such as a revision to an FRA drainage strategy. The application, as I understand it now, it's probably exceeded its determination time, though I imagine the council is renewing that to as long as they need to see this one through. But what I can see is that there's still no guarantee of an outline consent before us, which is sometimes the case when you take an allocation through to application and you find things perhaps of a sort of greater level of detail that perhaps weren't captured as part of the allocation process. So whilst I note that there is an outline application with the council, I don't see any evidence that that will be consented anytime soon. Subsequently, I also note that once it does get consented, it will then need to be sold, marketed to a developer to bring forward a reserved matters application, unless the applicant for this scheme brings one forward themselves and decide to sell that. So, you know, what we're seeing here, sir, is a considerable lead-in time that would be required in any event. But given that we haven't got an outline application secured, sir, I say that those 15 units should be removed from the supply.
Thank you, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. So this site's come forward actually via the community itself through the neighbourhood plan, obviously voted at referendum and approved at that referendum. So this is a neighbourhood plan allocation. We've got the intent shown there with the live application on the site. So in terms of the definition in the MPPF, it is allocated in the development plan. And in our view, there is clear intent being shown with the application submitted. That's our position. Thank you.
Any response to the site survey on this one?
From memory, no, but I'm just checking, sir. No, not in the 2021 survey, no.
Okay, 110023.
Land off Stewart's Field, sir. Housing allocation again in the Fordham neighbourhood plan. This site's been included for 12 dwellings, expected to come forward in year 5. That evidence appears to have come forward from a developer survey from 2019-20. Notwithstanding the fact that evidence is now updated, I haven't seen any further evidence to demonstrate that there is a submission with or will be near the council anytime soon. So I removed those 12 units from the supply.
Mr. Kay.
Thank you. Yep, similar to the other one, this came through via the community themselves in their neighbourhood plan, voted on at referendum. And therefore, at the base date, with a recently adopted neighbourhood plan, that's why the site was allocated under the category B. Having said that, I accept as we sit here today that there hasn't been any further progress, so I'm actually willing to concede this one. Because there doesn't appear to be the clear evidence coming forward yet that this site will be delivered in the 5-year period.
Thank you. Okay, 180029.
West of Woodford Road. This is a mixed-use allocation for 250 dwellings. The council has included 60 dwellings in the supply from year 4 onwards. So year 4 has 10, year 5 has 50. Now, following an EIA screening in 2019, it appears the applicant has moved to submit a full application for 209 dwellings. So not the full amount, but a significant amount of that. So that was submitted. That was submitted in 2020, so, and that's still pending consideration. So there's, as I understand it, there's still a number of large and significant unresolved matters to deal with here, notably on the grounds of highways, flooding, and objections from the affordable housing officer due to rate of compliance. At present, those objections remain unresolved, and I don't see a clear path to this scheme being determined in its current format in the near future. So whilst I recognise that there is a reserved matters application with the council, I can't say for certainty that will come forward, and I'm unconvinced by the rate of development the council submitted here. So I removed those 60 dwellings from the supply.
Did you say a reserved matters application, Mr. Ostenfeld? Is it a full funding application?
Apologies, it's a full application. The reference is in the schedule. It's 20 /01238 /FUM.
Okay, Mr. K.
Thank you. Yes, this, as just been mentioned, this is a full application. It's an allocated site. We now have a full application, not an outline application in. It's from one of the major national house builders, Barratt Homes, promoting this site, taking it through the system. Correct to point out there are some issues that need to be resolved. They are being worked on, as I understand it, and are resolvable. The most challenging one that has held it up over the last few months has been the highways issues, of which is just getting access to the site from the A10. My understanding that they are resolvable. It's just a matter of exactly where the roundabout will be located on the A10 and the challenges of that, but it is certainly a resolvable matter which is being negotiated through. So my understanding that progress is being made on this full application. Clearly, when it is a full application, we would jump straight up to a category A should it be consented. But in my view, we haven't gone for the full 200 or so units in the 5-year period. We've been considerably more cautious than that and just put forward 60 units. So in our view, the clear evidence is this is allocated, promoted by a major national house builder. We've got a full application in, not an outline, and that's the clear evidence that this site is deliverable. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, any response on the site survey for this one?
Not at 2021, no.
Okay, 230055.
We have land east of 5 Barway Road here, sir. Small allocation for dwellings brought forward in the 2015 local plan. I don't see, it's a small site, but I don't see any evidence from the council of a emerging planning application or indeed any evidence that this site will come forward as anticipated by the council. I propose it's removed and not follow the suggestion that those 4 will come forward in year 4 of the 5-year period.
Okay, thank you. Mr. K.
Yeah, this is like a similar site in Cheveley a few moments ago. Small site, allocated site, but I accept there isn't been that evidence coming forward to deliver it. So I'm willing to concede this one to cut a story short.
Thank you. 230056. Oh, Mr. Ostenfeld, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I pressed the button. Land off Brook Street, sir. Soham, allocation for 400 dwellings, 85 in the total, delivering from year 3 onwards. The latest response we appear to see from the developer here is from April 2020, so it's slightly out of date, but the important point is we haven't had any assurances of delivery. There's no application with the council, either full or outline. I have no evidence to support the inclusion of delivery from year 3. I've removed entirely.
Mr. K.
Thank you. Yes, this is an allocated site. We did, as just been pointed out, get the evidence from the landowners of a progress through their developer survey that they intended to deliver from year 3 onwards. Admittedly, we haven't seen updated evidence or progress in the last few months on this site, as far as I'm aware, which has been disappointing from our point of view, because as we see it as a deliverable site, but it isn't coming forward. So on reflection, I'm actually willing to concede this site.
Thank you. Q30057.
Land off Station Road in Soham. This is a mixed-use allocation for 90 dwellings. The council include 55 in the 5-year period, so 40 in year 4, 19 in year 5. I note that there is a detailed consent, full application, which has seen a Section 106 signed in July 2021. That's for 31 dwellings, sir. What I do observe is that there is a second application now with the council that is proposed for 108 dwellings. So that is a separate full application. Both references are on the schedule for your reference. So whilst the applicant, HP Soham Limited, has consent for 31 dwellings for the 90 allocation, what's quite clear now, sir, is that they wanted to try and push the boat to see if they can squeeze more out that application, out the allocation side, and go for a higher quantum. So it appears to me that whilst that full scheme for 31 dwellings has been consented, it's the developer's intention that will likely be superseded by this more recent pending application with the council. So I would contend that detailed application can be rendered undeliverable. The other thing that I would sort of point out here is the applicant here, if they do secure consent for that larger allocation, because there's still technical issues to resolve. If they do secure it, they will then need to sell the site on. The applicant is not a developer, and they will then need to go through that marketing process. So I'd assume it's a position here where the applicant is trying to sort of secure the best value for the site before they then sort of take it to market. I remove all 59 dwellings from the supply set.
Thank you. Mr. Kay.
Thank you. Yes. So, as I think was explained to you just then, but I'll explain it again just so we're all clear. This is an allocated site for 90 units in the local plan. What's happened is part of that site got permission for the 31 dwellings, which isn't contested by the appellant. So that's why the 59 listed in the 5-year land supply is simply the balance between the 90, take away the 31, leaves 59. What you've got has just been explained to you is a second application coming forward for actually exceeding the 90. So we've got 108 units, but more or less in line with what the allocation suggested at 90. So the council's position is, taking the site as a whole, the allocated site as a whole, the appellant is actually agreeing that it is deliverable because it's accepting that the 31 units are deliverable. So it's accepting that at least partially the site, the allocation site, is a deliverable site to be included in the 5-year land supply. What it's not accepting is the second.
Mr. Kay, sorry, before you carry on, can I just clarify, because I thought Mr. Austenfeld just said that the 31 scheme should not be seen as a scheme that will come forward. Is that right, Mr. Austenfeld?
That's correct, sir. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm not sure, Mr. Kay, you seem to be suggesting that it's accepted that 31 unit scheme can be included. Is that what you're saying?
Apologies, if Mr. Austenfeld could just remind me where in the schedule the 31 are contested.
well, in short, we're sort of claiming that no units will come forward from this development. So whilst I've noted I recognise there is a full application in place for 31 dwellings, it's very clear to me that the intention of the developer now is not to take that application forward. They're seeking a higher quantum of development, 108 units, as a way of going beyond that allocation. That will be the development if they get approval, that they will then take to market and sell to a developer. So consequently, whilst I know there is consent for 31, the evidence of that fresh application leads me to believe that 31 units will be undeliverable.
Okay, thank you. So in light of that, Mr. Kay, do you want to tell me what you were going to say?
So I've just, I think we just need to take a moment here to clarify what you've just heard here. What I'm doing is finding the 31 units in the 5-year land supply schedule. So you just have to bear with me a moment. Sorry, I'm just, my understanding was that the appellant isn't challenging the 31, is challenging the balance of the 90. Now I'm just trying to two, three, four, five.
Sorry, may I chip in here because I know the site? Would that be helpful?
Yes, please do, if you can shed some light on it.
I'm sorry, I know the site because it's one of mine. You are correct, consent was given for 31 and there's a larger application which covers that same site for 108. But the latest situation is that the applicant, who are Pistol Holdings, have approached me to get a deed of variation to the Section 106 agreement. Sorry, in order to allow them to phase the development so that instead of waiting for the 108 to get planning permission, they want to crack on with their smaller site. They don't want to lose out on their smaller permission. So a deed of variation has been agreed to allow the phasing of the development so they can crack on phase 1 and then phase 2 and then phase 3, just in case the larger site doesn't come forward, then at least they've secured the smaller site. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Austenfeld, were you, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, thank you to Mr. Greengrass for that. That's a helpful comment, but I don't think it sort of changes the approach that I would take here. I perhaps see that as a way for the applicant to ensure that they're not going to see that 31 units lapse. So it might involve doing some very initial pre-commencement works to ensure the validity of that application. But it is quite clear that the applicant here is banking on securing the 108 units, which would in turn supersede the 31 already consented. And as I see it, you know, it's still still a matter whereby we need to have a developer on board, an end user, before we're going to see any units on the ground here. So whilst that commentary has been helpful, it doesn't give me cause to change my assessment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kay, where are we on what do you think?
I'm beginning to wonder whether we, in our 5-year land supply report of October, we've omitted the 31 units from the schedule completely. So what ordinarily we would do, because these do get fairly complicated sites where a site's been split with permissions, half the sites but got permission, half has not. What we tend to do, or our approach in our monitoring, is to split a site into two, so that one site has, if a part of a site has permission, that gets its own row, and the part that doesn't have permission but is allocated, for example, that gets a second row in the full list of schedule of sites. What I think we've done by error is not included the 31 that's got permission, but we have included the balance of that site, the 59. Now, what you're hearing from the appellant is they wouldn't accept that 31 anyway, even if it was included.
Can I just see, Mr. Kay, you've allowed 59 units, presumably on the basis that the 108 unit scheme gets its permission and is built.
No, how it's been calculated is because this is in the category of an allocated site without consent at the base date of 90. So it's an allocated set of 90, but the reason why we don't put 90 in is because 31 already have consent. So that 31 should be included in the 5-year land supply, in the lengthy tables that you've got in the 5-year land supply report, but it doesn't appear to be, as far as I can see. So that seems to be an error on our part when we were reported in October. So what we've got remaining in the line that we're referring to now, the 59, that figure of 59 is simply the 90 take away 31 equals 59. It's not a reflection of the 108 application. What we're using as the clear evidence as to why the 59 should be allowed is that we've got an application, a full application in, which happens to be well in excess of the 59, to give us confidence that the 59 itself has a reasonable prospect of coming forward. Now, if that permission gets approved, clearly that'll be a matter for a future 5-year land supply report. I appreciate this is it's not helpful that I can't point to where that 31 is listed in the 5-year land supply report, but it doesn't immediately, I appreciate there's hundreds of pages to go through here, but I can't immediately find it. So it appears to have been omitted. Now, it wouldn't actually affect the figures in terms of narrowing the gap, because the appellant, it's not one that the appellant is saying should be removed from the 5-year land supply report, because it doesn't exist in the first place in the 5-year land supply report. It's something we will have to correct next time we publish this document.
Right, okay, so let me just try and be clear about what the position is then. Are you saying that this 31 needs to be added into your supply, or are you leaving it out?
If it's not already there, which I don't think it is, I think it should be added. Because as you can see in the 5-year land supply report itself, it clearly demonstrates that the site has a capacity for 90, but the fourth column says superseded 31, and that 31 reflects the permission. Now, perhaps over the break, I can just confirm for certain whether that 31 is already included in the 5-year land supply report, but I don't think, just looking through of the 10 minutes we've just had now, I don't think it is.
Okay, well, let's take a break at this point because we are overdue one probably anyway, and that will give you both the opportunity to have a look into that and form a view about what should happen, and we'll come back and pick up on it on there. So let's just adjourn now until 11:45.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Right, okay, let's resume then, please. Mr. Kay, what's the outcome of your investigations?
Yes, apologies, sir, for the confusion here. So the reason why the confusion arose, or was on my part anyway, was that when Mr. Austinfeld introduced this site, he referred to, or correct me if I'm wrong, that the 31 dwellings were not deliverable as well, and it was that bit that my kind of ears pricked up, if you like, as to I wasn't aware of that. I've now gone back to the original, the 5-year land supply reports, that's core document 3.24, and I found the 31, so it's not missing. So thankfully I thought I'd missed it from the schedule, but it's not missing in the schedule. So if you could just open that one, just so we can all see it. So core document 3.24, and it's PDF page 58. If you can just indicate when you've got there.
Yes, okay.
And midway down that page, it has exactly the same site reference. So the very far left column, 230057. Halfway down the page, you'll see a row where there's 31 units to be delivered. You've seen that one? So that's the full application that we're referring to on this site. So for part of the allocation site in the local plan, 31 units for part of that site has got full permission, is listed in our schedule, and then the balance is that separate row that is disputed. Now, unless I'm mistaken, I can't see anywhere in Mr. Austinfeld's proofs or this table that 31 is challenged or a disputed site. So that was where my confusion arose when that was mentioned, and I wanted to check that. Now, I don't know if you want to pause there and whether Mr. Austinfeld wants to comment.
Yes, okay, Mr. Austinfeld.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. I've also found the reference in the site schedule. I think perhaps it was a site original. I would say I didn't challenge. Perhaps I hadn't regarded it in the context of it being part of the allocation. I can see the reference in the schedule doesn't include the same allocation reference that we would have expected to see, and perhaps I've missed it on that basis. But my case still remains. We now see evidence of an updated or a proposed application for a greater quantum than the allocation amount. So that, on reflection, I think causes me some concern about whether or not the application for 31 would be delivered. But I'm grateful for Mr. Kay's clarification of where to find it. Thank you.
Right, okay, so your position remains, Mr. Austinfeld, that in light of the latest permission for 108 dwellings, you don't think the 31 will be deliverable?
Correct, sir. Sorry, my initial assessment was I assumed that 31 was part of the entry for 59. So that would be my position. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Kay, what do you say about that?
Apologies, so I'm just so I'm absolutely clear. So the 31, am I correct in saying is not being introduced as a new disputed site? Is that correct? Or
It is in dispute. So I think there was confusion between both of you as to how it was being considered, but Mr. Austinfeld is confirming that he does dispute that 31.
So Mr. Austinfeld is disputing not only the 31, but he's disputing the 59 as well. So that's an additional site he's introducing here. It's because as the 5-year land supply schedule splits it into 2 separate sites, 31 and 59, which adds up to 90. He's not to date disputed the 31, he's only disputed the balance of 59. So are we introducing a new disputed site? That's my question.
But where do we find the 59 separately in the 5-year housing land supply?
So that becomes because the 5-year land supply breaks down the appendix into the chunks that we described earlier, category A, category B, etc. So the balance is on, I'll find it for you, is on page 66. The PDF page 66 of that core document 3.24. As you'll see, it's got exactly the same site reference number, 230057. And if you read across it, the total, you'll see a number 90 is the site capacity. So that's the total site. What you'll then see in column 4, where the numbers are bigger than the column 4, is 31, because that's superseded. So that's where you deduct the 31, because that's covered by the previous row. Otherwise, we'd be double counting.
Yes.
So what we're left with is 59 for the allocated site. And what's been disputed in Mr. Austinfell's evidence, the proof, is the 59, not the 31. The 31's not covered.
Well, there's obviously been some confusion, and it's both that is disputed. So tell me why you think that they should all be deliverable.
Well, taking the 31, if with the introduced of the new site, the 31 we consider deliverable because that's a category A site. It's got full permission, category A, got no clear evidence that it won't. So the onus is on the appellant to demonstrate there's clear evidence that that 31 won't. We've got no clear evidence. There's nothing in his proof to say so. It's not even listed in his proof. All the evidence we've got is disputing the 59.
Okay, so you say the 31's deliverable as a Cat A site and PP planning permission is in place.
Correct. And nothing from the appellant to suggest otherwise.
And the remainder.
So if we turn into the 59 remainder, which is in effect a separate site, we are suggesting that the evidence that this site is deliverable on the basis of 2 points. The first point is that the site itself is delivering as a whole, as we just referred to, is 30 part of the site has got permission, and therefore this second phase clearly demonstrate that on that site as a whole, things are happening and are progressing. The second point is we've got a live application, a full live application, not an outline. So again, giving confidence that the promoter of that site is confident to take it straight to a full application to deliver the whole of the site. Whether that supersedes the previous one, that's a separate matter, but there's confidence there that the appellant is taking it forward. The third point, if I might add, albeit I would accept this is fairly minor, but the new Soham train station, which is adjacent to this site, has actually now opened ahead of schedule. So that is now a live train station. You can go and buy your tickets and take a train from that station now. From December it actually opened, which gives further confidence that things are happening on that site, that it's a very much an active live site, which gives me confidence that the remainder of the site, or if it gets superseded, the site is a very active deliverable site with things happening on the ground. So that's why not only should the 31 be in, but also the balance of 59, in my view, there is clear evidence of intent to deliver on that site, so it's clearly deliverable. Thank you.
Okay, anything further to be said on that site?
Not particularly, other than reiterating what I've said previously. I do take confidence that the rail station is now opened in Soham, but that I don't think is an expression of the deliverability of this site, more as an expression of the greater sustainability and accessibility of the settlement itself. What is clear is the council have accounted for the 31 dwellings. And the 59 dwellings now we see in their trajectory takes you up to the balance of the allocation for 90. But we already know that the applicant here doesn't intend to build the 90, they want to build 108. So there's a bit of discrepancy in the numbers. But not to rehearse what I've said previously, I can see here that the applicant wants to sort of build 108, not the 31 dwellings. That is what they're aspiring to do. They will keep the 31 live to sort of bank that, but it's clear to me that they're going for the higher quantum, and that still remains the subject of an undetermined application.
Thank you. 230061.
So land north of Blackberry Lane, allocation for 30 dwellings. A simple point, sir, is that whilst this is allocated, I haven't seen any evidence from the council of progress in bringing forward an application on the site. I removed the 30 in full.
Thank you, Mr. Kay.
Yeah, this site is actually a much bigger site than the 30. It's just 30 was put as a small proportion of the site into the 5-year period. The rest from year 6 onwards, it's an allocated site, hence why a category B. The site immediately next to it, south of Blackberry Lane, is progressing very well. It was partly on that basis that we were hopeful that this site would come forward as well. On reflection, as we sit here today, I accept that the applications, despite expectations that things would move forward, it hasn't, and therefore, on reflection as we are now today, I'm willing to concede that one.
Okay, thank you. 26008.
Land north of the Brook and west of Meeple Road, allocated as part of the Sutton Neighbourhood Plan for 50 dwellings. As part of the council's evidence, I note that there was permission granted as outline consent for 173 dwellings on the 2nd of June last year. I do observe that whilst a house builder has submitted this application, this is Linden Homes, this application has not been fully resolved. If we return to the council's planning website, we can see that whilst there's a resolution to grant, the section 106 is still pending 6 months later. So whilst I can see that there's an outline application that has been presented, it still not has been fully discharged, and we still do not have the subsequent steps we'd expect to see from the developer in terms of bringing forward a reserve matters submission. The council's rates proposed here, 20 in year 4 and 30 in year 5. We contend that the site should be removed completely from the supply zone.
Okay, Mr. Kay.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Dostenfeld tells part of the story there. I think there's some important context to also make you aware of. This site is actually a much larger site. It's not just a site of 50 units. So there's a site of 250 here, of which 77 units have got planning permission and are delivering on the ground. And those 77, that's a kind of phase 1 of the site, is by Vistry, the major national house builder. What we have is the remainder of the site of 173 units with permission. Sorry, not with permission, sorry, allocated, but as just described by Ms. Dostenfeld, working towards a consent. That wider site is owned by the same company. I know it's submitted by Linden, but Linden is part of Vistry PLC. They're one of the same company. So with phase 1 close to completion, as I say, by the same company, what the same company are progressing is that phase 2 are much larger. It happens to be twice the size of phase 1. So they're progressing towards phase 2. In my view, that demonstrates the clear evidence that when taken as a whole, this site, we've got construction happening on the ground now. The same company is close to finishing that phase 1. It's clearly showing intent for phase 2. We've got the full application in, which has made considerable progress. And therefore, I see no reason why this site is not deliverable. The remainder of the site is not deliverable in part. We're only suggesting 50 units, not the full 173, just 50, a small proportion of the site within the 5-year period, the rest of the 173 falling from year 6 onwards. We think as I say, this is not a separate standalone site. This is a continuation of a very active site by the same major national house builder. So we think that is clear evidence that this site is deliverable. Thank you.
Okay, anything in the landowner survey for this site?
I think you're on mute, Mr. Kay.
Sorry, I got on mute there. I don't know why I got on mute. So Appendix B, if you go to PDF page 83 of the 5-year land supply report, what you'll see there is the 77 units. They're confirming that they're comfortable with it. I know that part of the site, that phase 1 is not in dispute, but they are confirming that that is delivering as anticipated. So what they don't go on to confirm is I can't see the response in relation to the wider site. But as I say, we've taken a cautious view in that we're only allowing for 50 units and not until year 4 and 5. In practice, this may well be significantly before that and a greater quantity of that per year. But on a cautious view, we think we've allocated 50 units.
Thank you. And then 60015.
Thank you, sir. Last on the list, land to the rear of 92 Judges Drive. This is a full application for a single dwelling. Principal concern from us here, sir, is that the site has a resolution to grant, signing the section 106. This was following committee resolution back in November 18. So we're now over 2 years where a section 106 is yet to be reconciled, to which point the development of the site can't be taken forward. So whilst I know that there's a intent for a full application, it appears to me that there are obstacles presently in bringing this site forward and will remain to be the case until a signed section 106 is in place.
Mr. Kay?
Yes, we're obviously only talking about one unit here. It has a resolution to grant. I accept that hasn't been resolved, but as a single dwelling, once that has been resolved, it clearly can be delivered exceptionally quickly. It's just a judgment in my view that is clear evidence that we have a single dwelling, has all its detailed full application approved. So it's not an outline, it's a full application. We're simply waiting for the section 106. I accept there's been a delay on that, but I don't see that would push that to be beyond year 5. So I'm content there is sufficient evidence, in my mind, clear evidence that this site is deliverable.
Right, okay, thank you. Well, that's the last one on the list. There's one more row which is about windfall. We dealt with that at the beginning of this session. So anything else that either of you want to add on housing land supply?
Not from me, sir, other than to say that I'd be happy to continue to engage with Mr. Kay to bring to you an updated sort of schedule of sites which sets out our respective positions following this session. So we'll do so, sir, to allow, before the close of the inquiry, clearly, as soon as we can, to give you an updated position.
Yes, thank you. That would be very helpful. And could you both please, following that, set out a revised calculation to tell me your respective positions on how much housing land supply exists. Thank you. Right, okay, well that brings us to the end of the housing land supply session. The next thing that we're going to do is hear from planning witnesses, given that affordable housing is now being dealt with in writing. I think the time estimate for Ms. Greengrass was 45 minutes, Mr. Smythe.
Yes. Yes.
Is that about right?
Yes.
Yes. Are we ready to go straight into that now?
Yes. Can I just check through you, so whether Miss Greengrass is happy to do the evidence in chief now?
Yes.
Whether she, do you mind? Yeah. Miss Greengrass.
It seems she does mind.
Yes.
So I'm just getting my papers around me. Yeah, I think so. Just let me get myself set up.
So whilst Miss Greengrass gets ready, I guess the expectation would be, subject to your view, that we do evidence in chief, then take the lunch break,
Yes.
and then deal with cross-examination this afternoon. Yeah.
Yes, I think that'll take us fairly close to 1 o'clock, and it will have a lunchtime adjournment before cross-examination.
Yeah.
You let us know when you're ready, Ms. Greengrass, and then Mr. Smythe can introduce you.
I think I'm ready. Yeah, I think I'm ready now.
Are you ready, Miss Greengrass?
I think so, yeah.
So if I can call the council's one and only witness to the inquiry, you're Barbara Greengrass. You've got a chartered membership of the RTPI since 1993. You've got an honours degree in geography and a master's in town and country planning from the University of Reading. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
You've got over 30 years of experience, and you presently occupy the position of planning team leader with the district council.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Have you got your proof evidence in front of you?
Yes, yes.
And do you adopt that as your evidence to this inquiry?
Yes.
Great. So it's not my practice to ask a witness to read bits, because I think it's a waste of time. So subject to you be happy with that, it's just a few supplementary questions.
Yes, I think we're all familiar with the written evidence by now.
Yes.
So yes, it's fine.
Ms. Greengrass, firstly, page 17 of your proof.
Yeah.
At paragraph 6.11 at the bottom, is there any amendment you'd like to make to that paragraph?
Yes. I think upon reflection, I think my language was rather strong when I wrote this, because I've said that policy growth 4 is not relevant, but clearly the text of the policy does have diagrams which include the appeal site. So I would say it's got some relevance, but it's obviously got, and I've also said it's got no weight, but it's obviously got no, what I meant to say was it's got no decisive weight, and it's not determinative of this appeal. I'm saying it's not significant, but I'm not saying that the inspector should completely ignore it.
Fine. And then the next, I think the final reference in your evidence before we turn to Mr. Hills is page 21. And it's looking at paragraph 7.9. And it's the sentence which has been chopped down in light of the agreement. So I'm interested in the bit of the sentence which says, but the council does not agree that the need is especially acute in Soham, nor in East Cambridgeshire. Could we take up the live housing register document? So if you could help us with the core document number, I think it's...
Yes, it's got a core doc, it's been added, actually it's core document 7.26. So it's at the top.
Yeah. So what is this document and what does it show?
So sorry, Ms. Greengrass, I missed the reference. It broke up a bit. Could you just give me that again?
Yes, it's I've got it as 7.26.
Thank you. Right, that's an Excel spreadsheet, is that right?
Yes, I mean, it's basically a live housing register. I mean, I just wanted to just flag it up. And it's updated monthly, on a monthly basis. I'm just happen to be looking at the 1st of December 2021. And it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, it's got 6 neighbouring local authorities on there. I'll just quickly at the top, it's abbreviations at the top, but you've got Cambridge City, you've got East Cambridgeshire District Council, you've got Fenland District Council, Huntingdon District Council, and South Cambs District Council, and then West Suffolk District Council. And it was merely to show that if you look at the very bottom, the very last row, that just shows how East Cambridgeshire's housing list sits compared to the neighbouring authorities, and you can see that consistently the list in this district is lower than its neighbours. And it was just really to give some context to you, sir, about the amount of applicants on the housing list. Really just to give some context. So
the spreadsheet that you're referring to has a number of tabs along the bottom, and I'm not sure exactly which one you're on.
I'm looking at a hard copy, so I'm not being helpful. As Mr. Smythe, are you able to?
Yeah, I can't see the different councils being identified.
They should be abbreviated along the top line, the top row.
There's a number of tabs setting out each month, and then there's one that says all chart data, band A, band B, band C.
Do you want to help, Lucy? Sorry, just give me a moment.
So if I may just add, while there's this pause, I'm a little bit surprised at this line of questioning, because this seems, to me at least, and those with me, to be straying from expressing planning judgments on weight to asking you to take various inferences from a spreadsheet as to extent of affordable housing need. And to be honest, if that was going to be said, I'd have Mr. Stacey watching this call. So we may need to put in a note for Mr. Stacey. This does seem to be straying beyond the agreed parameters of Ms. Greengrass's evidence.
Yes, let's just see what the point of this excursion is, Mr. Smythe. What are you trying to show me?
Yes, Lucy, do you mind showing it again? Can you just explain to the inspector? Sorry, sir. The straightforward point, sir, is that the shortfall is this council is performing better than the 5 neighbouring in respect of affordable housing, and we say that feeds in to the judgment you may reach as to weight. That's a
So I do object to that, because that suggests that that spreadsheet is being used by Ms. Greengrass and Mr. Smythe as evidence of the extent of the shortfall. Now, we don't accept that is actually right and that there's the correct inferences to draw from the spreadsheet, but we had thought the position was that the evidence as to the extent of the shortfall set out by Mr. Stacey was not challenged, and what was in issue was the judgments to be reached from that evidence. If the actual extent of the shortfall is something which is in dispute, I need to call Mr. Stacey. And I must say, doing so, this raising this point now is not reasonable.
So the position is we don't dispute one dot or comma of the nuts and bolts of Mogger's evidence or Stacey's evidence. We accept the shortfall, but the weight as to what weight you give the shortfall, plainly it's relevant to see in real life who's on the housing list. And we're simply relying upon that. I'm surprised that my learned friend is taking this strict point about not raising new points, because yesterday we had his witness raising the point about Winfield drying up, which is a point not raised anywhere in the written proofs. And there's various other points which are made. So I don't think it's fair for a learned friend to hold me to a high standard, which he doesn't hold to his own witness.
Not going to do with that tit for tat point. So but the simple point is that you're being asked to treat that spreadsheet as indicative in some way of either extent of need, extent of shortfall. There's no evidence from the council about that, what that spreadsheet means, what it does do, what it doesn't do, what it's consistent with, what it isn't consistent with. That's factual evidence in relation to affordable housing, not judgmental evidence. And if this spreadsheet was going to be relied upon in this way, I would have wanted Mr. Stacey to comment on it, and because he's got, I know, certain views about the extent to which actually it really does indicate affordable housing need, supply, shortfall, etc. This is not evidence of planning judgment; it's evidence about need.
So can I just come back on one tiny point? So this evidence was served on the 22nd of December. The appellants have had it for 3 weeks. It doesn't take them by surprise.
Well, Mr. Scott, you say that it was sorry, let's just deal with it. The document was submitted as a core document, but you haven't told us why it's been submitted or what your evidence is about it. So my understanding was that the council was not taking a point on affordable housing, had nothing to say about it, and therefore the appellant's written evidence could be taken as read and unchallenged. So is that the case or not?
That's right, yeah.
Right, so why are we talking about affordable housing now other than making a judgment about the weights to attach to it?
So I say, so this doesn't contradict Mogger's evidence, it supplements the evidential picture and supports Miss Greengrass's view that the situation isn't as bad as the appellant thinks it is, to put it very crudely. So it goes to weight, I say. I should say, sir, if I'm pushing at a locked door and it's not going to help you, I don't want to annoy you because I don't think this is a huge point which will turn the appeal. So if your indication is it's not going to help, then ditch it and I'll move on.
Right, let's move on then, please.
Very well, happily. Can we take up Mr. Hill's proof, page 10?
Yeah, sorry, I've got that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And it's in respect of growth 2, paragraph 4.1.6, and it's the latter part of that paragraph where he draws attention to the fact that if policies pull in different directions, one has to consider whether the proposal accords the development plan as a whole. And what's your response to that assertion by Mr. Hill?
Well, yeah, clearly our policy, we don't have policies that pull in different directions. There's no policy that pulls against growth 2. And clearly, growth 2 is not just any old policy. It goes to the heart of the development plan. It's the very core of the development plan. It sets out the locational strategy. So clearly, if a proposal offends growth 2, then it must offend the whole development plan because it's so much the heart of the plan. So basically, my point is the conflict with policy growth 2 is actually a big deal. It's not something to be understated, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And just taking the point about pulling in different directions, does Mr. Hill identify which policy he says pulls in a different direction to growth 2?
No, he doesn't identify that, no.
Next, page 12, Mr. Hill's evidence. And at the top of page 12, the first sentence, the council accept that the housing requirement is now out of date, but it's not seeking to update the development envelopes. So that's the point Mr. Hill makes, criticising the council. It's only reviewing growth 1, and it ought to be reviewing growth 2 as well. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's up to the local planning authority to decide which policies need reviewing and need updating. And I feel like he's trying to attack that position of the planning authority. And really, it's not a matter for this appeal, for this inspector to be considering that.
And next, can we turn to page 27? Page 26 and page 27.
Yes, I've got that. There's Soham master plan vision, yes.
Yes, so the inspector can see there's about 2 pages of text dealing with the Soham master plan vision, which the appellant relies upon in supporting its view on sustainability credentials of the site. I don't think you say it's irrelevant, but what weight do you say should be given to this document and why?
I say it has very limited weight because the document is so old. I mean, it's 12 years old. The evidence base for that would be even older, so it way predates the NPPF. It's obviously not a development plan, it's not a neighbourhood plan, it's not an SPD, and it's got no statutory status. And in any event, it's since been superseded by the development plan, which is the current local plan. So I'm not saying that the inspector should close his eyes to it, but what I would say is it's a very little assistance in reaching a decision on this appeal because of its age and its status, and it should be given very limited weight.
And on the point about the broad locations for development, so do you want to be drawn to the document, or do you know the point we're dealing with?
Mr. Hill's point, you mean his, yeah, Mr. Hill's
Yeah, so I'm just asking the inspector. So I'm using shorthand. Do you understand the point I'm making, or do you want me to draw you to the document? And
I think if I'm not following, I'll let you know. So
yeah.
You can just ask the question, and I'll let you know if there's a problem.
Yeah, fine. Miss Greengrass, we all know, I think, what the point is, which is there's a diagram in Grove 4 which identifies a broad location for development. That's the same area as the appeal site, and the appellant therefore draws comfort from that as enhancing its sustainability credentials. I hope I summarised the position reasonably fairly. What's your response as to what weight the inspector should give to the broad location when it comes to the final planning balance?
Only very limited weight. I mean, I acknowledge that, as I said, it's a schematic diagram within the RGA of policy growth 4. But as I said in my evidence, that was an indicative, something that may happen in the future at some local plan review in the future, which is still to happen. So to my mind, it's not part, these broad locations aren't part of the policy wording. They're merely an indication of what may happen in the future. Yeah, is that?
Should we take it in stages? So let's assume the council haven't got a housing land supply. Let's, for the sake of argument, say the inspector finds it's a 4.95 year supply. What's the significance of the broad locations in that context?
So what you're saying is if the council didn't have a 5-year land supply, is that what you're saying? Yes.
Correct, yes.
Then obviously if we didn't have a 5-year land supply, the tilted balance would come into play. Therefore, growth 2 would not be up to date. Therefore, the settlement boundaries would not be up to date. Therefore, the council would be looking to release more greenfield sites in order to keep the supply of housing. And in my opinion, the council, or in my opinion, it may well be suitable for development in that scenario, the appeal site.
Yeah, understood. So let's deal with the other scenario. If the inspector finds a council can demonstrate a 5-year supply, and therefore growth 2 is up to date for that reason, how much weight should the inspector give to the broad locations of development in growth 4?
Very limited weight, because policy growth 2 would have full weight. There would be no need to release additional greenfield land to meet the 5-year housing land supply, because we have more than a sufficient supply. Therefore, this appeal would not be approved.
Yeah, understood. And just picking up the point, just so the inspector's clear, am I right to say that it's your planning judgment, if we don't have a housing land supply, settlement boundaries and growth 2 would be out of date, tilted balance applies, and in those circumstances, you say the appeal should be allowed? Is that a fair summary? Understood.
That's really what I was trying to say, yes.
Yeah, understood. So the council's case hinges on demonstrating a 5-year supply.
Yes.
Yeah, if we lose on that point, it's common ground, the appeal should be allowed.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Can we, I think, penultimately take up Mr. Hill's Appendix 4?
Yes, so this is the map of Soham showing the site allocations. Is that the one? Yes.
Yes. So what would you invite the inspector to draw from this diagram?
Yes. So you can see on this diagram the location of the appeal site in the context of the whole of Soham. And really it was just to invite the inspector to see that the site, I wouldn't say the site is in an unsustainable place, because clearly Soham is one of the main towns for growth, but clearly it's at the top end of the town. So it's not in the most sustainable place. If you look at, and it begs the question as to whether most people living on this appeal site would actually walk or use their car. If I can just take you through some of the sites that are already on that map, you can see from the bottom up, yeah, you can see SOH 7, that's 126 houses. Now that's already basically been built out. All of those houses have been delivered. Then you've got SOH 4, that is being built now at pace. SOH 5, again, work has commenced on site, and that obviously looks like it will build out at pace. SOH 1, there's an application pending on that site. Further up, we have SOH 3, again, an application pending on there. And then SOH 2, an application pending there. And then SOH 9, we have some of that site being, some of that site's being built out now for a care home, housing, and a children's nursery. So that just sets some of the context of Soham. And also, so that just shows that Soham is actually absorbing quite a lot of development. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of development happening now. And therefore, really, Soham doesn't need the release of greenfield land to provide even more housing outside of the plan-led system. So that's that point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
The next, sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, is it the design and access statement? Is that you're dealing with next?
Yes, because yeah, is
Yeah,
that there was
yes.
just something relevant that I picked up in that. So the design and access statement is court document
1.24, I think.
Yes. Have we got that? Yes. So page 19, I'm looking at in that.
Yes, so it's entitled Section 2, the assessment, and then we've got an aerial photograph on the right side of the page. What do you invite the inspector to draw from the image?
So again, this kind of puts the site in context. You can see that really it's at the very upper edge of Soham, not really close to the main facilities of the town. You can see annotated there, so you can see the site circled in red. You can see Soham Town Centre is the orange. You can see the secondary school, another important location, is like the brown circle near the bottom of the map. And then another important location is the actual town. Yeah, I showed you the town centre. The other location I wanted to point out on here was the medical centre, which I think has been marked as sports centre, but I think that's the medical centre there. It's a dark blue dot. So again, that's an important location for the inspector to be aware of. And I would invite you, when you do your site visit, to just have a look around Soham just to get a feel for where these facilities are in relation to the site. But I suppose the point I wanted to make was, in reality, how many people will actually walk those distances? And I've taken the trouble actually to make a note of some of the distance to these facilities. It was really just for you to question yourself as to whether you think in reality people will walk to these places or get in their car.
Ms. Greengrass, where do I find any of this in your written evidence?
It's not in my written evidence. It's something I've thought of since.
So again, I mean, I'm a little surprised, given that the statement of common ground says in terms the site is sustainably located. And had I known there'd be some sort of nudge, wink, suggestion that wasn't quite true, I might have wanted my highways expert here.
Okay, well, the appellant's planning witness is obviously to come, and we are to pick up on anything. But Ms. Greengrass, it is important that evidence is submitted in advance and that the appellant have the opportunity to consider it and deal with it. So it would really help if you could stick to the evidence that you've given rather than introducing new matters at this stage.
So that's all the questions I have. Thank you, Ms. Greengrass.
Right. Okay, well, thank you for that. We will take the lunch break at this point before we start cross-examination. So we'll take an hour, please, and come back at 1:35. Thank you.